and welcome to this special episode of Painting Insights podcast. Let me introduce myself for the audience. My name is Simon Renshaw. I'm the host of the podcast, and being that it's Christmas, I thought I would share with you a supercut from a previous season. Being that it's 2025, we're currently partway through season 6. So the supercut is going to be from season 3. You may have watched season 3 or listened to it. You may not have, but this is going to be just snippets from each conversation that I had for that season. And I'm going to be completely removed, so it's just going to be back-to-back answers. I've done this once before. I believe it was for the end of season 5. So this is just for a Christmas special. I thought I would do that. But I'm going to be doing a similar thing for the New Year's Eve episode. But it's Christmas Eve. I want you to eat, drink, be merry. Nice bit of wine here. So let's sit back and enjoy these moments from the wonderful guests we've had and enjoy this Christmas special. Cheers.
I'd started to get into to doing more abstract work, and then I happened to show someone, and they said that looks like Roger Cecil's work. So I googled him, and it was like I fell in love straight away. Just his work's amazing. He's dead now. He died not too long ago. I think 2014, but I might be wrong about that. And he lived in the valleys in South Wales all his life and painted. And he didn't paint for financial means. He lived in his mum and dad's house, and he just did these incredible abstract paintings. And I think it shows that he was painting, almost without an audience. His audience was himself. If he liked the painting, it was a good painting. And if you take a look afterwards, his work blew my mind.
I will.
So interestingly, she said my work looked like his, and then when I saw his work, it blew my mind. And then I had to sort of rein myself in from trying to copy his work. Then I was just feeling like, this is where I want to be. So he was I'd forgotten that. He was a very good introduction into my abstract work. He was the kind of the severing of the cord from figurative to abstract. I just thought I don't need to be, have to paint, figuratively. Well, they're saying that he has done a few figurative paintings. But check him out. He's not people have heard of him, but he's ever so good. Probably one of my favourite painters.
So composition, design, color theory, communication, and that's become a huge point of focus of me lately. And the idea of images to communicate that are predate the written word or a written language. We think of cave paintings, and what this guy is with a spear, and what this thing that's not a human and it's a cow. So that idea of communicating in a way that it feels real, because your brain will say, well, that's not a car. It looks more like a boat. That looks like water. It doesn't look like grass. So, that idea of just stating enough to communicate the idea of the subject that you're painting, rather than getting too locked into all these like nouns and, the idea of like over describing things. So that's become a big focus, and probably the hardest flip to find, to even begin to switch it, is to disconnect what our brains want to associate things as. Because when we get onto a flat surface, the laws of the universe don't apply to the laws of our mediums that we're working in. So that's kind of become an obsession, I would say, over the last, it's always sort of been aware of it, but I'm really focusing into kind of communicating that idea to really instill that sort of personal representation, personal growth, personal vision of what you want to paint, rather than just, I want to paint like this guy, or I want to paint like this guy. So it gives you the ability to kind of develop a personal voice and vision, rather than something that's just too derivative, I guess, is a fun word to use. But in the representational world, everything's kind of derivative. Like when you're in an idea of, I find this beautiful, or I find this intriguing, I want to communicate something with the light or something I'm seeing with this, depending on your medium, there's lots of different ways to do that and color choices, but it's really, you're still going to get certain things that may call similarities to a different artist just because of the medium and the limitations or the you know, the benefits of that medium. So finding ways to break out of bring your own honesty and individuality into what you're doing, even if it is reminiscent of greats who came before us. That's how we stand on the backs of giants. And you know, it's different than making a political statement or trying to change the world. You know, I just want to make pretty pictures that feel good to me and invoke a sense of dreamlike memory of a situation or place rather than a completely accurate representation of that. And that's, anyway, so that's kind of a big piece of what gets me really excited and that I'm kind of about.
The brush thing is an interesting journey because although I am pretty budget minded when it comes to materials and I mean, use the best you can, you know, use the best you can afford. I think that's good advice. But I've spent literally, and I mean literally, thousands of dollars on brushes trying to find, okay, what works for me. And I've bought the cheap ones and I've bought the expensive ones and everything in between. And what I've discovered is there's just not the perfect brush, you know. And this is the other thing. You spend all this money on brushes, and guess what? Even if you take care of them, they wear out eventually. You know, they start to fray and they lose their shape. And there's all kinds of tricks that I've done to delay that. But if you can find a reliable source of a brush that consistently works, I think that's a good thing. You know, so like I use a certain brand of paint. And so these brushes, so there's this company in California called Trekell, and they're, I don't know, not as widely known as they should be, in my opinion. But they make all kinds of different brushes, and they also they will do things. They've done this recently. If customers aren't buying a certain size or type of brush, they'll discontinue it. You know, so they are a business. It's not like we're going to have everything available. We're only going to make stuff that makes money. But they do. So there's two types of brushes I like to have. I like to have hog bristle, and I like to have a softer brush. Now, back in the day, that would be sable. You know, those are getting really expensive. And, you know, the synthetics are keeping right up. Oh, you can sell sables for the, oh, we'll just sell our plastic bristles for, you know, I'm just like, come on, really? You don't need to charge that much. But, and, you know, Trekell, I think also the reason I have gone to them a lot is I feel like they are, you know, they're keeping up with everyone else, but it seems like a little bit lower than most everybody, you know. Some of the other, and I'm not going to name any names because I've used everyone's brushes, and there's a lot of good brush companies out there. But I don't know, Trekell has just kind of become my buddy, and they've let me know I'm going to be on their pro team now. So I've sold tons of brushes for them just in my workshops, like not being like, you don't know, guys owe me anything. I just like your company. And then they started kind of, you know, patting me on the back for that. And then I recently, you know, tried to get on their pro team, and they've said, yeah, you can be on our pro team.
I did spend quite a bit of time doing plein air painting, and I think I've come to the realization that the time I spent doing that was very beneficial because, or in other words, I learned a lot from plein air painting, and a lot of what I learned I've taken with me into the studio. And although you know, landscape painting is very different than than figure painting, some of what I learned has a lot to do with inventing and not getting too precious about, or let me put that into context. So, as a landscape painter, as a plein air painter, I learned that you really couldn't be precious about or too fussy about the fact that things are they're constantly changing when you're outdoors painting. The light is changing, the sky is changing, that sort of thing. And so because of that, I started to invent a little bit. I would work on a landscape outdoors, then I would bring it back to the studio and I'd finish it up mostly from memory. Um, and inventing a little bit. And those things have served me well as a figure painter or as a studio painter, um, as far as uh, just making if I have to make things up and I have to invent a little bit. I think they were good lessons that I learned as a plein air painter.
When I was 19 years old, I was in uni in Portugal, Madeira Island, actually. And I developed this extremely strong allergy to white spirit. So we were doing a class of silk screen printing. And back then, you would have to clean everything by hand with very toxic products and whatnot. And I remember spending almost 2 weeks in the hospital with a very, very severe reaction. And the doctor told me that it was a contact allergy, and I could not work with that stuff anymore, which meant stop painting with oil. I had a long conversation with one of my teachers, and she said, "Well, you have acrylic; you can paint with acrylic." But I was always of the opinion that acrylic is more for, like high school students, and you open a little tube and it just dries, and it's I don't want to do it. It's wasting money and blah 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 and whatnot. And she said, "You know what? Try it and see how you deal with it." So last year in Madeira Island, I tried it, and I started developing a little bit. Then I moved to Porto, north of Portugal. So I transferred from Madeira University to Porto University, which was a completely different environment. Academically, a lot stronger in terms of classes like painting, drawing, sculpture, etc. They were much stronger. The schedule was a lot heavier. So we would have, for instance, 12 hours of human anatomy drawing, things of that nature, which helped me a lot to develop my skills. And I ended up meeting a teacher, one of my favorite teachers, and he taught me how to actually deal with acrylic. He taught me that I should pre-mix my palette. I should keep it in airtight Tupperwares. My palette itself should be like a shallow Tupperware with a lid. Just simple technical things. And these things changed a lot of how I could actually paint. So I could spend more time with acrylic on a canvas than I usually did. Before, I would have to dilute my acrylics to try to make them last as long as possible and try to paint as quickly as possible, because it dries in 2-3 hours. You can push or move paint around anymore. So there's that learning curve. But after you understand how you can manipulate acrylic, and you find your own type of calligraphy and your own dictionary, it just becomes something natural. I could not paint with oil today. I know there are loads of options. Every day I get emails, people saying, "Oh, you should try watercolor-based oils." I'm okay with acrylic, thank you. Appreciate it, but me and acrylic, we pals.
Yeah.
We good.
Yeah.
I think sometimes each painting, it kind of like a lot of times I would start off with the figure and I would figure out the painting based on the figure, if that makes sense. I would like figure out the background based on the figure, or I would create a world around a figure, so and a lot of times, a lot of the paintings, like a lot of the especially the larger scale paintings, when I start painting, I kind of I feel like that's the end of a journey, with that individual work. It'd be sometimes that some of the images that when I finally finish it, I have been drawing or, kind of tinkering with that image for, a year or two, maybe, that happens sometimes because a lot of my paintings still start off with drawing. Like, I don't really show a lot of my drawing process, like online and socials, but mostly everything I paint started off as a drawing. And so I could be working on the drawing for a couple years sometimes, and I finally figure the image out that, how I want to see it, so I draw a lot. So a lot of the backgrounds, a lot of the imagery, it could be a lot. And sometimes, well, a lot of my paintings are actually my two kids, my son and my daughter. So, sometimes when I'm focusing on a particular idea, I would, especially with my daughter, I would like kind of the background will be focused on how her character is and some of the things that she likes. So like, for instance, everything I do with all the stuffed animals and stuff like that, that really comes from my daughter. Cause my daughter, she has so many stuffed animals. Like I can't even go in her room. It's just, they everywhere. It's probably my fault, but cause I keep buying them. But, so most of all that stuff is actually her actual toys, and her actual stuffed animals, and she has them everywhere. So that's kind of how that came about when that particular series of paintings, because I was like, I wanted to paint something that was specifically for her and paint something that specifically showed kind of her character, her how fun she is, because she is really a fun person, even at 8 years old. She's about to turn 9. And, so I thought that was a good way to kind of show how she is. So a lot of it sometimes is based on the person, especially if it's my kids. I kind of know how they are. And sometimes it can be a series of painting that I'm working with. Like I got a series of painting with which my son is in, and it has him and a lot of hyenas. And that series actually started because, he probably don't even remember this, but he was probably about 5 years old, and he was like infatuated with like lions and hyenas and stuff like that. And so I was just drawing stuff, and it was really mostly just to draw stuff to impress him. Like, oh, look at this, son, and and it kind of took up a life of his own, and he loves them. Every time I create one, I try to put a print aside so I can put it up in his room. So the backgrounds, it's a various reasons. Sometimes it'd be for if I'm doing a particular show, the theme of it, I kind of incorporate that theme in the background. So it really just depends on it's various reasons for the background. It's just various reasons, but it all starts with like it does starts with imagination and because I want each painting to kind of feel a little different than the last one. I don't really want to try to replicate, like create a formula and just kind of replicate that formula. I want the paintings to somewhat be unique, so.
Yeah, it comes to life there with a bit more personality.
Exactly. And I feel like the background is the best way to make that, because if you remove the background, it's like I'm painting, kind of the same person over and over again. So, the background is kind of how to make that unique in my opinion.
So I had two really great teachers, and I studied with them on Thursday and Friday, and they both sort of were coming from the same place, not the same place, but they're coming from a similar place, and they were getting to a similar place, but they came, their journey was completely different. One really was interested in color, and just all of the magic that you can get with different color combinations against each other and on top of each other. And she would make me do these color exercises in class, where I learned so much. And she was always, in terms of critiques, she was always like wildly unimpressed by the work that I would bring in. So when I was taking class with her, I was a professional artist, and I was showing in this gallery that was very successful, and I was painting portraits professionally of strangers. And so I would bring in a portrait that I did that was done, that as far as I'm concerned was great, and I'd show it to her and she'd go, yeah, okay, all right. And then she was always, so unimpressed, and she'd grab my paints and my palette, and she'd mix up a color that was just much brighter, lighter, and more saturated than the palette of my painting. My painting would be finished, and she would stick it right down there in the middle of the forehead. So I'd have this portrait, and then this glaring electric peach on top of the painting. And then she'd walk away and she'd go, paint it all up to that. And I would have to enliven the color everywhere: foreground, background, clothes, face. So I had her on Thursdays, and then I had a teacher on Fridays, and it was all fundamentals, and it was all stuff that I didn't know before I met these two. I had a lot of experience, but I didn't understand. I understood how to draw. I had a teacher in high school who taught me how to draw plumb lines and all of that. And it was without that, I don't know where I would be. But I didn't know anything about painting, and so it was all just fundamentals, lights and shadows and colors and all of that. And the notion of edges never occurred to me. It never occurred to me on my own that edges could be worthy of exploration and very descriptive when, depicting three-dimensional form, and in terms of design, in terms of what the viewer notices and what they don't notice. And so he introduced me to that concept, and then that one didn't, I was just telling you how I kind of got linear perspective from the beginning. I didn't get edges at all. I wanted to paint like Sargent, and he had these great edges, and he had these great accents. He'd have these accents, in the corner of a lip or in the corner of an eyebrow or the negative space against a face, where he'd have a super sharp edge just shooting through there, So I would kind of blur some of my edges, and then I'd have really sharp edges. And my teacher, I could see, he was always really nice, but I could see it just grating on his spine, like, kid, how do you not get this thing that I'm just explaining to you and I'm showing to you, and that one took a long time to kind of take, both in terms of me understanding why why to explore edges, and also just physically how to do it. And at a certain point, and little by little, I had little kind of epiphanies along the way, and at a certain point it got to be intuitive. But those were critiques, the color and the edges. Those were critiques that helped a lot and that made me look at everything differently. The way that I describe it to my students is that, for the most part, sharp edges come forward both in space and in importance. So when we look at something, we notice the contrast and we notice the sharp edges. And edges that are softer or blurry or out of focus, not only do they look farther away, but we also don't notice them. So once we can get comfortable with those notions, then it gets fun to start subverting it and playing with it. So maybe you have something in the background that you want to be really noticeable. And maybe there's something in the foreground that you don't want to be noticeable. And maybe there's a round object that's even soft, like a peach or something like that you do want to really stand out. And maybe you've got a stainless steel knife in the foreground that you don't want the viewer to notice. So it's like anything. Once you learn the rules, and the rules that you described are, as I would say, exactly right, and then you can start breaking them and turning them on their head and subverting them.
For me, it usually starts with an idea of a show that I want to put together. And that is really around the concept, the theme that I want to present. Sometimes it is born out of just visiting artists in their studios and thinking, oh my God, I would love to put their work in a show. And then, going into my mental archive, I might have ideas of another artist whose work I would want to put it with or something like that. So it really starts with that idea. But I do visit a lot of artists in their studios, partly to support them, whether I know them, sometimes to see the work in real life, to have more intimate conversations with them that we don't get on social media, for all these reasons. So I'm kind of developing, let's say, like a mental bank of, people whose work I would be interested in doing something with some point, or, even like pairing them up with somebody else I know or referring them to other people. So yeah, these things are kind of working in tandem all the time. But when I do have an idea for a show, then I'm looking to put artists in it. It's really about how much it fits in with the theme, and is it offering another perspective on whatever let's say the core theme of that exhibition would be. But as I say, there's been other times where I've seen artists work and thought they would be great with this other artist, and that work would be in really great dialogue, or we'd be able to put forward another sort of idea and way of seeing things. So yeah, it's a bit organic. It's not that specific or by rote or anything like that.
Well, I've always kind of drawn and painted and things from when I was a kid, and I was always encouraged to. My family are quite sort of creative and eclectic in what they do. So their sort of standard ideas are not, the usual 9 to 5. You've got to go to school, get good results, go to university, get good grades, get a good job. I've never had that kind of very standard influence. So it's always been sort of doing things and perhaps working for yourself and stuff like that. So I was always encouraged to kind of be creative and paint and draw and things like that. But then I got into tennis at quite a young age, started training full time to try and be a professional tennis player. And then I did that for a little while, stopped doing that and started coaching tennis, which I always hated, actually. And I think one day I just realized that I got back from coaching and I realized that I hadn't painted or drawn anything for ages, maybe even years. And that sort of really, I felt really disappointed and quite sad about that. So I just thought, oh, well, obviously if I become an artist, then it means that I've given myself reason to focus on painting and drawing more. So that's exactly what I did. I would coach during the day, and in the evenings I would go home and start painting and drawing. And so that I could, become an artist and start showing my work in galleries and things like that. My parents obviously were like, yeah, go for it, because, that's what happens when I say, I want to be an artist now, no longer want to be a professional tennis player. So, and then that's what I did. I just started painting every available hour that I had in my living room, and eventually got to show a couple of pieces in a mixed show at Highgate Contemporary Art. So yeah, and it kind of kicked off from there, really.
There's a skill set that you need to be an illustrator, and there are a lot of skills involved in it. You have to be able to create, a space, people, like emotions on faces. You got to get a likeness sometimes if you're trying to, it depends on the project, but but I found that I was looking around at some art exhibits, and there were some beautiful landscape paintings. A lot of them had lighting, of course, and I was intrigued by them, and I thought maybe I'll try my hand at that, or I'll try to kind of combine some of my illustrative stuff in more realistic landscapes. And so I found that the skill set that I needed to make good, successful illustrations wasn't necessarily translating into the fine art, space. It wasn't translating because I had a deficit in certain areas where it was not being read the way I wanted it to be perceived. And that's where it all started, where I thought that I had a good education from my Bachelor of Fine Arts in college. I learned a lot. But at some point you have to acknowledge that you need to take, you got to continue your education. And I was at a loss. Like, I didn't really know. You only know what you know. And so I was making these landscapes that I was really trying to make something that looked real. Like, I was trying to represent what I saw outside. And the skill set that I had was more of a fantasy one. So it was like, I created magical landscapes and they were great for what I was doing, but they were not translating into something that was believable to the average person. And so I was frustrated. I tried and tried, and I just could not get people to see them, take them seriously. It was like, they're so nice and they look like they belong in a children's book. And it was just, that wasn't my intent at all. So it was really frustrating. And at some point along the way, I was like, my husband actually suggested it to me. And he said, you might want to consider taking a workshop with a landscape artist, because your education came from an illustration, somebody who had studied that and did that. And there's different kinds of art. If you're going to paint portraits, you get to learn from somebody who does portraits. If you want to paint landscapes, you get to learn from somebody who does that. So that's what I did. That was and then of course they say the rest is history, but trust me, it wasn't an overnight success. It was maybe a 10-year thing where I finally learned a little bit of what I'm doing. So I think, in 2014, I hit my breaking point. I was tired of being rejected from shows. I was getting tired of working for clients, honestly, like on some of these self-published books. I was getting jobs in them, but they micromanaged it. It was just time for me to paint what I felt I wanted to paint, and to just kind of take on my personal journey for art that didn't have to do with somebody else's vision. And I did. I signed up for a plein air class, and that was a wake-up call. And that's going from painting from your imagination completely and somebody else's vision to painting what you see outside. And that remains today the hardest thing that I do as an artist. Literally, the most challenging thing of anything at all is taking my paint box out in the field and painting what's in front of me. I just did it the other day. It didn't come out with a good painting, but you know what? We move on. We just keep trying to get better at it. Yeah. So that's where I'm at now. Is over the 10 years, I've done a whole series of workshops, a lot of self-reflection, trying to figure out how to take my vision, because we all have our own vision as artists, and how to just kind of create what we want and have it come out the way we envisioned it. So to bridge the gap between what we want to say and how it's being perceived by everyone else, if it's exactly how we want it to be read. And it's been quite the journey.
I just want to take a minute to talk about the patrons for Painting Insights podcast. They are fantastic support for the podcast, the reason it's still going as well. But I also want to mention that every month we post a bonus show to our Patreon channel. And recently I was fortunate enough to spend the day out with Rob Poynton as he painted one of the landscape paintings that he made in North Wales in 2025. And I joined him on a day when it was quite stormy weather. He said it was some of the worst weather conditions he's painted in, and I managed to capture that on camera. It may sound awful, but it was quite a privilege to see how he does what he does in those conditions. If you're interested in that story, that will be exclusive to Patreon. So I highly recommend checking it out. It's the price of a cup of coffee, and it means the world to Richard and I for supporting the podcast. I really genuinely want to thank everyone for watching, liking, commenting, subscribing, but especially to the patrons. They really do prop us up and keep us going. So if you can, check it out. The link will be in the description below.
I can say I'm not studied or researched or African tribal clothes or Japanese Buddhism, like a figure or like a outfit. I never studied as a subject, but subconsciously, I'm sure that I really have influenced these visual or image. So that is comes out my works. So that is the I'm not sure that this is the correct answer, but I never learned, but I just visions of these layers. It really affect my creation.
I think there's always something going on in that character's head, and it's always so. I actually work mostly from photography. I just take photos of my family when they're not looking. Really, I just kind of sneak a photo in, and it's always those kind of moments in between, where there's no specific kind of action or kind of motivation of a character, like you see in a lot of physical work. Like they're not really doing anything. They're just kind of sitting there thinking a lot of the time. I think I'm trying to kind of make the most of that kind of quiet time that we have to ourselves. So yeah, it's definitely, yeah, contemplation, I think, is the word there.
Setting up the cameras, like plural, it takes effort to get it. And usually, like right now, like I'm using my iPad for us to have this podcast, and I mean it's just in my face, you know, like, and I like keep stepping away and up, but like the camera is always in the sort of creative person's face, like facing the subject, facing the canvas or the sculpture or the I don't know what, you know, the dance space or the writing tablet or, you know, what have you. And it's just, I think it's just, you know, I have two cameras essentially. Well, technically, I guess I could have three, but like a laptop, the iPad, and my cell phone. So, but they're just three things that take up space. So you, the creative person, has to be comfortable or ready to do a little bit of gymnastics to get like around that thing. Like, you know, whether it be just your visibility of your subject or just whatever, like just hand placement with a brush and stuff or whatever it is. So it's tricky. It is really tricky. I mean, I don't know. I would prefer like some sort of like a device that goes over my eyes, so it literally just tracks where I'm looking, and I think it might be more effective.
The first time when it really hit, and I had this experience about saturation. Again, these things are hard for me to verbalize. Like I said, it's a very internal thing. But I was in the Netherlands, and I'd taken it, and I was in my friend's studio, and he was working with neon. And your eyes become so sensitive to color that the neon was literally hurting my eyes. Like I could not stand it. It was a pain. And we were in this studio where there was a loft on top of it. And so I had to go upstairs because it was dark up there to let my eyes rest. But then in there, I was looking at all these other paintings, and in the dark, I felt like I could see them. And so it like really internalized this relationship of like saturation and the emotion to it. Because being like I was in this dark loft all alone, seeing these very like muted tones. And then downstairs, there was kind of this party with all these neons and these bright lights I couldn't stand. And it just makes these connections that normally I wouldn't do sober or, you know, too cerebral. It was more of like an internal thing. And then, over time, what I'll do now is here in Oakland, they've legalized it. So you can get it in microdose. So you don't have to blow your mind out. So you take a few, and I'll look at my paintings or I'll look at books of paintings and just kind of you understand that color just a little bit better. I think it really does help with too, and it's kind of something you're saying about the other gas is it's a complete abandonment of all your preconceptions and everything you hold on to. Like that's why I think they is slightly tangential, but the reason why they legalized it here is for therapeutic uses, which I've done as well. And there's something about that drug where you just get a complete abandonment to like whatever emotion you're clinging to or any preconceptions you have about something. So that just in looking at art in general with that, it helps get rid of all these biases that you may have in your head, you know, that you're not even aware of. It's just completely clear way to look at things.
The beautiful thing about art is, I mean, there's many beautiful things about art, but one of the most beautiful things is that you're able to showcase to other people how things look like to you, your inner world and and the interface between your inner world to how you interpret the world around you. So for example, if I were to just put it in simple terms, I put a loaf of bread on my studio table, and to everybody else, this looks like a totally banal and completely pedestrian scene, right? If for some reason, because of my own temperament and my own makeup, I look at that bread and I see something epic, right? Then my painting should be able to communicate this epic aspect of the bread such that people who look at my painting will understand and experience the bread the way that I experience it, meaning I am able to position other people vis-a-vis the world such that they can see it through my own private vantage point, right? So you're able to basically share your inner world and the way that you see the world around you with other people if you're very attuned to the craft of painting. And moreover, if you're really good at it, to me the sign of a really good painting is that people have said to me in the past that they will never see bread the same way. Right? Then people start taking your painting with them into their private life, right? So at first it would be, oh, I understand how Ken is looking at that individual part of bread, but if it's that individual loaf of bread, but if you successfully become really impactful, then this kind of lingers in people's associative bank, such that the next time they see bread, they could kind of see it through the eyes of the painter who has influenced the way that they now see the world. So, for example, I am enchanted by landscapes, for example, by a painter called Ilya Gefter. And so and he has these landscapes of Tel Aviv that I think are just absolutely magical. So when I walk around Tel Aviv at night and I'm seeing the sea, or I'm seeing street lights, or I'm seeing some of his motifs, I can't help but see them through his eyes. I'm imagining, oh, what would happen if Ilya Gefter stood right here and looked at this Tel Aviv landscape? I can already see the painting, basically. So all it took for him is to paint 20 paintings, but now these 20 paintings have become an infinite number of paintings because they were so successful that I can walk around Tel Aviv and I can paint Ilya Gefter images in my mind without him even having to render them anymore. So that to me is the mark of truly great art, where you're able to so comprehensively bring other people into your vision of the world, such that your vision of the world becomes part of their vision of the world. And there's something really objective about that, because this is uncontrollable. This is not something that I can turn off, right? I'm enchanted by a painter called Ophir Bagon. He has a series of paintings that he did around Habima Square. And now whenever I go to Habima Square, all I can see, oh, this one looks like an Ophir Bagon painting. Oh, this one looks like an Ophir Bagon painting, right? So they've kind of, for lack of a better word, they kind of encamped themselves in my brain forever, and they have taken a little piece of land, a little piece of real estate in my psyche, and they're there forever, and they're there forever for the better, right? This is something really important to me as a painter, because once you realize that if you get good at painting, you have the possibility of living rent-free in other people's minds, then you understand the responsibility that gets attached to that, because then you better be good influence, right? You really don't want to parasitize anybody else's mind, because you are going to be there forever. So whatever you choose to plant there, be very reverent and be very careful about what you put out there into the world, because again, with great skill comes great responsibility. This is a little turn of phrase on our classic Spider-Man saying.
So I have these two recent body of work I make now. One of them is a stack of boxes, right? And they're cardboard boxes, but they're not just stack of cardboard boxes. They are these boxes are painted on, and they are painted with faces of people who have migrated from Africa to different parts of the world. And it's just a conversation about migration and, what migration means, and, even to talk about, how these boxes also migrate and how it's so synonymous to how African immigrants as well migrate to the rest of the world. So I have that set of, stacked up. And the reason why it's stacked up is because in some way the boxes kind of support each other. And when you think of communities that immigrants make in this rest of the world, you see that there's a lot of support between themselves. And it's just talking about the beauty of immigration, the beauty of African culture, because these boxes as well are different colors. And when you stack them up, they kind of feel like an African fabric with these different colors. So yeah, that's one of my most exciting works. I've made over 200 paintings on the boxes, so 200 boxes in some way. And I've stuck them up in France, in Miami, in London, in Singapore, and in so many places. I do my exhibitions in Berlin as well. And then the second body of work was inspired by this thermographic camera. I used to play with that while I was in school as a civil engineer, and we used the camera to kind of look at where there was leakage in pipe, and that kind of took my attention. And when you use the camera on people, they kind of turn in a different, they are represented in a different color. And I went to talk about energy and how our world is full of energy. So I kind of adopted and took the palette of the thermographic camera. And that palette kind of reminds me of fire, or reminds me of the sun or energy in some way. And I used it to make these incredible paintings of immigrants who, find their way, who survive and go through all of these issues, being in a different country and have staying and even being in a different culture as well. So yeah, so it's there's a lot of civil engineering into the work, but the work in some way talks about my experience as an immigrant as well. When coming to London, I realized that I was not a man. I became a Nigerian man. Different from when you're in Nigeria, you're just a man. But when you are in London or in New York or you're everywhere, you become a black man or a Nigerian man or an African man. And, that changed my perspective a lot. And I wanted to understand what that meant to my identity, what that meant to me, and what that meant to the rest of the world. So I started to photograph my experiences and kind of look at these experiences and bring one or two conversations about my life and my journey and about these experiences as well that I face.
In school, I had mentors, and like in the traditional sense, where you had somebody more or less standing at your side, not really, but, you'd bring your work in for critique and things like that. And receive a lot of really good, powerful, oftentimes brutal criticism and feedback. So I had that through school, and I kind of graduated in like 2015 or so. After that, I don't want to say this in a way that like it's all only me. That's definitely not true. But I've kind of been a lone wolf after that. I'm sort of I live in a part of the United States where there's not tons of people. It's a town of 40,000, and I just sort of paint alone. I get together with friends a lot and do painting events a lot. I'm pretty extroverted, so I like to chat on the phone with people. And when I do like bigger events and I get to meet my heroes, which happens all the time, it's so cool. You know, I try to pick those people's brains. But there's this thing called the internet now where like I've taken one workshop in person in the past after schooling, but I've got so many online videos. I've done that thing, where you pay for a DVD of an artist that you really like. So in that sense, I have mentors. But the primary way that I learned to do, like right now and have for this many years, is just looking at people's work. I don't think it's a substitute. I mean, gosh, I wish I could have an apprenticeship with everybody. That's not going to happen though. So being able to just look at the images of their works, the higher the JPEGs of the painting, again, that's no substitute at all to seeing the work in person. And I also have access to that. I live close to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where there's a lot of really great work. And I get to see that fairly regularly. But the internet's really cool too. I mean, it is a useful tool. I definitely don't think it's a be all end all. I have my big problems with a lot of what it's doing to us as people, but for strictly art, it's been really cool.
I don't think I was anywhere for more than 3 months, and I think that's even saying a lot. I can't even think of a place. Oh no, yeah, okay, 3 months. I'd say 3 months was max for where I ever was at any point, but usually it was about 3 weeks, and then I'd be off to the next. So that really forces you to think compactly and in boxes. And I was living out of a car during that whole time, so it was really what fit in my car is what I had. And I got rather creative with easels and so forth and ways to hang art. So there was an immediacy of just really knowing my material and just being able to set up wherever I was. And during that time, I started painting a lot more on paper because it is so lightweight and takes up very little space. And I still very much work on paper, but I also work on aluminum, which is, I think, my main, what I'm mostly known for. I've been doing it well, not the longest, but it's something I've investigated for over 20 years now. And canvas linen. But definitely started working a lot more with paper at that time. And because that all stemmed out of a personal upheaval, like my perceptions of the world changed, but also my mark making changed. And in a good way, I'd say. My work became a bit more emotional, I'd say, a little bit more freed up. And also my thoughts around what I was making certainly changed. Because prior to that, when I was visiting places like Antarctica, Greenland, and the Maldives, like I'd mentioned, and others, I was thinking it more of like a documentarian way. So it really was like taking these photos on site and just, really, but then thinking of how to translate them in paint. But with being nomadic and having the luxury of really having this, the gift of time, serious time in these spaces, I was able to really think about the immediacy of the mark and the moving landscape in front of me. I mean, I was always a plein air painter and traveling a lot with that, but just the fact that I was so mobile, I was really just reacting to the energy of the space rather than like the documentation of it. So I wasn't painting a literal space, but more the sensation of space, especially because what I would take from these places to bring into larger studio work, when I had the opportunity to have a larger studio, which I don't always have, I would take those marks that I came up with in those places back to the studio. So eventually, like, the photo was irrelevant that I was using to document the space, and it was just really about the perception of the stories, thinking about the stories, thinking about the mark, and so forth when I brought it back to the studio.
a lot of it's about getting the color shapes to work within the four sides of the canvas, and scratching it off and rubbing it out and then restating the lines until I feel like it's almost there and it's time to stop. It starts to almost resemble what I'm painting, or there's a nice tension between the shapes and the four sides of the canvas. It's not always the colours that I see. Sometimes there's a bit of slippage or a mistake. But then I look at it later and think, that works okay. Maybe it's the shapes that are more important. So the lines go down first. I did agonise about whether or not to put the colours down first. Lots of painters that I know work from colour patches or colour swatches. I have worked like that sometimes, but I like the lines. I like the lines to be strongly present as well. It's like I think some of that Bernard said, a well-designed painting is half done, something like that. So it's like you can stop at any point, and if you like things to be a bit unfinished, like I do, that's I like things to look a bit slightly unresolved, or like they could be the painting could be gone back into.
I do think that everything you ever do really is sort of in the mark that you make, isn't it? I mean, essentially, I know that sounds a little bit sort of hippie bullshit, but actually, you can't be somebody else, and the life that you've lived and the experiences that you've had inform essentially every mark that you make, and so my background in illustration, and I spent God knows how many years drawing on a drawing board and then on the computer, and making line drawings every single day, and then doing life drawing as well in evenings very often for years and years and years, and it does in some way inform what you do. You can't help it informing what you do. So I think that people in Ireland, they talk about miles in the brush, and miles in the hand, and I get that. The way that you make a mark is sort of, it's very highly honed, really. You spent so many years wielding a brush and wielding a pencil that you do sort of know what you're doing, and you do have a mark that is very much your own, I suppose. But as far as the information in the painting goes and making up the painting, I think that's just sort of developed since I did my MA here in Aberystwyth in 2010. I got interested in architecture, and I was encouraged to sort of use the line work, the technical line work even, which I'd already, up to that point, I'd always seen it as something different, as something separate to my painting practice. I was actually encouraged to sort of bring the two together, and that's really what almost immediately gave me my style, I suppose. And then I started sort of looking more at vernacular architecture, but also then finding that, well, I could produce a relatively competent image fairly quickly in terms of a drawing, but how did I then push it on? I was always very cautious with colour, but the collage seemed to just add something to it. It added almost like another layer of depth, or dare I say, sophistication. It certainly knocks me slightly out of my comfort zone. It asks some questions, and so I think that's just developed over the last sort of 10, 12, 14 years, where I know the corrugated is sort of, it's very easy to sort of replicate and make something look like it's a corrugated roof. And,
but we all sort of borrow ideas across, and I want it to go on and be more than just corrugated paper. It's very often I love maps, so I get maps in and wherever I can, and then increasingly text as well, stuff out of magazines or printed out text myself, and just sort of collage that in. And I don't know. There's no easy answer to sort of how long does it take. It just sort of develops and it keeps developing, and the next painting has always got to be better than the last one that I did. And that's the fascinating thing about art, isn't it? It's sort of unraveling your own. It's like psychoanalyst, really. It's like working on yourself, like all the time, and unraveling things and trying to work out why something works and something else doesn't. And I don't know, endlessly fascinating, as long as we keep the creative juices flowing.
Well, that is it for our Christmas special. I hope you enjoyed it. I thought they were wonderful guests, and finishing it off with Pete Monahan, amazing. Now a little bit of secret information. In the new year, 2026, the first guest you'll see is Pete Monahan. The second episode he's done with us, but I go to see him in person, and it's really interesting to see the difference between when I first met him over on the first episode he was on with us to this second conversation where I've been to visit him previously, and we're discussing new work and how he's taken workshops that have actually given him an insight into different practices. It's fascinating. So that's going to be the first episode of 2026. We're still partway through season 6. It will start again on the 7th of January. So there'll be no break. This Christmas special, there's going to be a New Year's special as well, where on New Year's Eve I will post an episode which will be the same as this, but we'll be celebrating the New Year together, and it will be clips from season 4 of the podcast. So I hope you enjoy that. Well, thank you for joining me for this special episode. I really appreciate you all watching or listening, subscribing, commenting, becoming a patron, whatever it is you do. It all supports the podcast and it's greatly appreciated. Thank you for being with me here. I hope you're enjoying yourselves and having a lovely Christmas, and I'll see you at the New Year's Eve episode. Cheers. We hope you enjoyed that episode. If you can support the podcast by leaving a like or a comment down below, that would really be great. But what we'd really like is if you're able to leave a review on the podcast channels, wherever you listen to it or download it, because that helps us get spread around the internet so that more people have access to us and able to see what we're making.
Also, follow us on Instagram, and we'd really appreciate it if you like and engage with our posts. Help get the podcast better known. Thanks for listening.